Sir, you need to stop right there and turn around slowly. Is there a problem, officers? Sir, you match the description of a suspect in an armed robbery that occurred in this area approximately 30 minutes ago. We need you to place your hands behind your back and step away from that briefcase. I've just completed a legitimate business transaction at First National Bank.
Sir, you match the description of a suspect. Drop the bag and put your hands behind your back. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished marble steps of First National Bank in downtown Atlanta as those words crackled through Officer Jake Morrison's radio. But what happened next would expose a web of corruption so deep, so calculated, that it would shake the very foundation of the Atlanta Police Department. This isn't just another story about racial profiling. This is the account of how two rookie cops thought they'd found the perfect victim, a successful black entrepreneur whose only crime was walking while black with dreadlocks and a briefcase full of legitimate business documents worth millions. But Zephyr Kingston wasn't just any target. He was a tech CEO with the resources, intelligence, and determination to turn their predatory mistake into a $15 million lesson that would send shockwaves through law enforcement nationwide. If powerful stories, voices, and black triumphs matter to you, subscribe to Bold Black Watch TV. Like, comment, and share so these stories travel further. The story begins at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Zephyr Kingston's penthouse apartment overlooking the sprawling cityscape of Atlanta. At 28 years old, Zephyr had already accomplished what most entrepreneurs only dream of: building a cybersecurity empire from absolutely nothing. His morning routine was methodical, almost ritualistic, beginning with meditation overlooking the city that had raised him in its harshest neighborhoods and foster care systems, yet somehow produced this remarkable success story. Zephyr's journey to this penthouse hadn't been typical Silicon Valley fairy tale material. Born to a teenage mother who struggled with addiction, he'd spent his childhood bouncing between 7 different foster homes across Atlanta's South Side. Each placement taught him something different. Some homes taught him resilience through neglect. Others taught him the value of education through mentors who saw potential in a quiet, observant boy with an insatiable curiosity about how things worked. The turning point came when he was 15, living with the Hendersons, a middle-class black family who ran a small computer repair shop out of their garage. Mrs. Delilah Henderson noticed how quickly Zephyr absorbed technical concepts, how he could diagnose computer problems that stumped customers twice his age. She started bringing him to work after school, and within months he was handling complex network security issues that her regular technicians couldn't solve. "That boy's got something special," Mrs. Henderson would tell her husband Cornelius. "He sees patterns where other folks just see problems." But Zephyr's path wasn't just shaped by his foster family's encouragement, it was forged in the fire of a devastating injustice that would haunt him for years. When he was 16, his biological father, Thaddeus Kingston, was wrongfully convicted of armed robbery based on nothing more than a convenience store clerk's racially biased identification. The real perpetrator was caught 3 years later, but those 3 years behind bars destroyed Thaddeus's health and spirit. He died of a heart attack just 2 months after his release, never having had the chance to rebuild his relationship with the son he'd been forced to abandon. This tragedy became Zephyr's driving force. Every late night spent coding, every business plan he drafted, every networking event he attended, all of it was powered by a determination to build something so substantial, so undeniably successful, that no one could ever dismiss him or his family as disposable again. By age 23, Zephyr had founded Technova Solutions from his tiny studio apartment, initially focusing on cybersecurity consulting for small businesses. His breakthrough came when he developed an AI-powered threat detection system that could identify potential security breaches 340% faster than existing commercial software. Within 18 months, Fortune 500 companies were licensing his technology, and by his 27th birthday, Technova Solutions employed over 200 people across 3 office locations. The irony wasn't lost on him that his success came from protecting others from digital predators, while the analog world remained full of predators who wore badges and carried the authority of the state. This particular Tuesday morning held special significance. After 2 years of negotiations, presentations, and security clearance procedures, Technova Solutions was finalizing a $15 million contract with the Department of Homeland Security to provide cybersecurity infrastructure for critical government systems. The contract represented more than just revenue, it was validation that a kid from foster care, a young black man with locks and a dream, could build something so valuable that the federal government would entrust him with protecting national security interests. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Zephyr walked through the imposing glass doors of First National Bank's flagship downtown location. The building itself was a monument to financial power, 37 floors of steel and glass reaching toward the Georgia sky, with a marble-lined lobby that whispered of old money and established influence. Zephyr had chosen this particular branch specifically because their commercial banking division specialized in large-scale business transactions and government contract processing. The meeting had taken over an hour, not because of complications, but because of the meticulous verification procedures required for a transaction of this magnitude. Certified checks totaling $2.3 million, letters of credit from 3 different federal agencies, and documentation thick enough to choke a law library, all of it legitimate, all of it properly notarized and authenticated, all of it representing the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. "Mr. Kingston," said Patricia Whitmore, the senior commercial banking representative who'd handled his account for 3 years, "I have to say, watching your company grow from that first business checking account to this moment has been absolutely remarkable. You should be incredibly proud." Zephyr smiled, adjusting the leather briefcase that now contained documents worth more than most people's houses. "Mrs. Whitmore, 3 years ago when I walked in here with a business plan and big dreams, you treated me with respect when a lot of other banks saw a young black man and assumed I was wasting their time. That meant everything to me then, and it still means everything to me now." The briefcase itself was a gift from Delilah Henderson for his 25th birthday, genuine Italian leather with his initials embossed in gold, a symbol of how far he'd traveled from that computer repair shop garage. As he walked through the bank's lobby, past the marble columns and beneath the crystal chandeliers, Zephyr felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He wasn't just carrying business documents. He was carrying proof that systemic barriers could be overcome through intelligence, persistence, and an unwavering belief in one's own worth. The security cameras positioned throughout the bank captured every moment of his transaction, every handshake, every smile of legitimate business success. These same cameras would later become crucial evidence, but in this moment, they were simply witnesses to a young entrepreneur's triumph. 6 blocks away in the parking lot of a Crystal Burger restaurant, Officers Jake Morrison and Tyler Brooks were finishing their lunch break and discussing much more than hamburgers and shift schedules. Both men were rookies hired by the Atlanta Police Department just 8 months earlier, but they'd already established a disturbing pattern of behavior that had nothing to do with protecting and serving the community. Morrison, 26 years old and originally from rural Georgia, had joined the force after washing out of 2 different college programs and spending 3 years delivering packages for a logistics company. His motivations for law enforcement weren't rooted in any noble desire for justice. They stemmed from a combination of frustration with his own lack of direction and a deep-seated resentment toward what he perceived as other people's undeserved success. "I'm telling you, Tyler," Morrison said, wadding up his burger wrapper and tossing it toward a trash can, "these people walk around here like they own the world, flashing money and acting like they're better than everybody else." Brooks, his partner, was 24 and had similar grievances, though his stemmed from growing up in a middle-class family that had struggled financially during the 2008 recession. His father had lost a management position at a manufacturing company, and Brooks had watched his family's comfortable suburban lifestyle slowly erode over several years. The experience had left him bitter and looking for someone to blame for what he saw as the fundamental unfairness of economic success. "The thing is," Brooks replied, lowering his voice even though they were alone in the patrol car, "nobody ever questions us when we say someone looks suspicious, especially if they fit a certain profile." Their criminal partnership had begun just 3 months into their probationary period. The first incident involved a young black professional they'd stopped outside an upscale restaurant, claiming he matched the description of a suspect in an armed robbery. When their search revealed $800 in cash, they'd confiscated it as potential drug proceeds, knowing that challenging the seizure would require legal resources most people couldn't afford. That first theft had netted them $400 each after they split the take, but more importantly, it had taught them how easy it was to weaponize their authority against people who had no recourse. The robbery suspect description had been fabricated, the paperwork had been buried in bureaucratic red tape, and their victim had eventually given up pursuing the matter rather than risk further harassment. Over the following months, they'd refined their technique. They'd identify well-dressed black men in affluent areas, follow them until they could manufacture a pretext for a stop, then claim to discover suspicious amounts of cash or valuable items that would be confiscated pending investigation. The investigations, of course, never happened, and the confiscated items disappeared into a network of pawn shops and private sales. Their success had made them increasingly bold and increasingly careless. They'd started targeting victims carrying larger amounts of money, and they'd grown confident that their badges provided sufficient protection from consequences. What they hadn't considered was that eventually, They'd target someone with the resources and determination to fight back effectively. At 2:45 p.m., Morrison received a radio call that would change everything. Reports of suspicious activity near First National Bank downtown. The report was completely fabricated. There had been no suspicious activity, no robbery, no legitimate reason for police presence. But Morrison and Brooks had been monitoring the bank's area for weeks, identifying it as a prime location for finding affluent targets carrying substantial amounts of cash. "Tyler," Morrison said, grinning as he started the patrol car, "I think we just found our next payday. Every story here is bold. Every voice matters. If Bold Black Watch TV moved you, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and help us amplify Black stories about justice that deserve to be heard." At 2:47 p.m., Zephyr emerged from First National Bank into the bright Atlanta afternoon, his briefcase secured in his right hand and his car keys in his left. The Tesla Model S waiting for him in the parking structure represented another symbol of his success, not flashy for the sake of being flashy, but a practical choice for someone who valued both performance and environmental responsibility. The autumn air carried the familiar sounds of downtown Atlanta, construction crews working on the new transit line, delivery trucks navigating narrow streets, and the general hum of urban commerce. Zephyr was mentally reviewing his afternoon schedule, a conference call with his development team at 4 o'clock, followed by dinner with potential investors from a Silicon Valley venture capital firm. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. He'd walked maybe 50 feet from the bank entrance when he heard the commanding voice behind him. "Sir, you need to stop right there and turn around slowly." Zephyr's first instinct was to look around, assuming the officers were addressing someone else. But when he turned, he found himself facing Officers Morrison and Brooks, both with their hands resting on their weapons and their expressions suggesting they'd already decided he was guilty of something. "Is there a problem, officers?" Zephyr asked, maintaining the calm, professional tone he'd learned to use in high-stakes business negotiations. His voice carried no trace of alarm or irritation, just genuine curiosity about what appeared to be a case of mistaken identity. Morrison stepped forward, his chest puffed out in a way that suggested he was enjoying the power dynamic. "Sir, you match the description of a suspect in an armed robbery that occurred in this area approximately 30 minutes ago. We need you to place your hands behind your back and step away from that briefcase." The statement was delivered with such authority that bystanders automatically assumed it must be legitimate. But Zephyr's analytical mind immediately identified several problems with the officer's story. 30 minutes earlier, he'd been inside the bank, surrounded by witnesses and security cameras. More importantly, he'd committed no crime, and the officer's suspicion seemed to be based entirely on his appearance. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding," Zephyr replied, maintaining his composure despite the growing crowd of onlookers. "I've just completed a legitimate business transaction at First National Bank. I can provide documentation of my identity and the nature of my business here." Brooks moved to his partner's right side, creating a tactical formation that made it clear they weren't interested in hearing explanations. "Sir, the time for talking is over. Place the briefcase on the ground and put your hands behind your back immediately." The crowd gathering around the scene included several bank employees who'd witnessed Zephyr's transaction, a group of construction workers on their break, and multiple people recording the interaction with their smartphones. What none of these witnesses could see was the subtle communication between Morrison and Brooks, hand signals they developed to coordinate their criminal activities. Zephyr found himself in an impossible position. Compliance would mean surrendering documents worth millions of dollars to officers whose behavior already seemed suspicious. Resistance would likely escalate the situation and provide them with justification for using force. His father's wrongful conviction flashed through his mind, another black man destroyed by a system that presumed guilt based on appearance rather than evidence. "I'm going to comply with your instructions," Zephyr said clearly, ensuring his words would be captured by the recording devices around him. "But I want to state for the record that I have committed no crime, and I believe this stop is based on racial profiling rather than legitimate law enforcement activity." The search that followed was a masterclass in police corruption disguised as legitimate law enforcement. Morrison opened Zephyr's briefcase with theatrical precision, as if he expected to find contraband rather than business documents. When the certified checks and federal contracts were revealed, his expression shifted from mock surprise to calculated greed. Well, Morrison announced loudly enough for the gathered crowd to hear. "What do we have here? Multiple certified checks totaling over $2 million, with no reasonable explanation for why a suspect in an armed robbery would be carrying this amount of money." Brooks joined the performance, examining the documents with exaggerated suspicion. These could be forgeries or proceeds from illegal activity. This amount of money, carried in cash equivalents, is consistent with drug trafficking or money laundering operations. The accusations were absurd to anyone with basic knowledge of legitimate business transactions, but they were delivered with such official authority that some bystanders began nodding in agreement. The officers were essentially conducting theater, creating a narrative that would justify their theft while providing legal cover for their actions. Zephyr watched this performance with a growing sense of disbelief and rage. Officers, those are legitimate business documents related to a federal contract with the Department of Homeland Security. You can verify this information with a single phone call to my attorney or to the contracting office. Morrison ignored the suggestion entirely, instead focusing on creating documentation for the seizure. Sir, under civil asset forfeiture statutes, we're required to confiscate any assets suspected of being connected to illegal activity pending a full investigation. You'll have the opportunity to petition for their return through proper legal channels. The legal language was technically accurate but practically meaningless. Civil asset forfeiture laws were designed to target criminal enterprises, not legitimate business owners, but they provided a convenient legal framework for police theft when applied without proper oversight or good faith investigation. Brooks completed the handcuffing with unnecessary force, ensuring that Zephyr's wrists would bear marks for days afterward. You're under arrest for possession of suspected drug proceeds, money laundering, and resisting arrest, he announced, adding the final charge despite the fact that Zephyr had been completely cooperative throughout the interaction. As they loaded him into the patrol car, Zephyr managed to make eye contact with Patricia Whitmore, the bank representative who'd handled his transaction. Her expression of shock and outrage told him that at least one witness understood exactly what was happening. She was already pulling out her phone, presumably to call someone who could help. The ride to the precinct provided Morrison and Brooks with the opportunity to discuss their plan without witnesses. They'd done this enough times to have a standard procedure. The confiscated items would be logged into evidence with minimum detail, then quietly removed and sold through their network of contacts. The charges against Zephyr would be dropped after a few days, ostensibly due to lack of evidence, but the money would never be returned. "This is our biggest score yet," Brooks whispered to his partner. $2.3 million in negotiable instruments. We could retire after this. Morrison nodded, but he was already thinking beyond this single theft. The beauty is, who's going to believe him? A young black man claiming the police stole millions of dollars from him? Even if he has lawyers, it's our word against his, and we've got badges. What neither officer realized was that their patrol car's digital recording system had been upgraded 2 weeks earlier with new software that activated automatically whenever the emergency lights were used, regardless of whether the officers manually enabled it. Their entire conversation was being captured and stored on servers they didn't even know existed. The Fulton County Jail Processing Center was exactly what Zephyr had expected. A dehumanizing maze of concrete, fluorescent lighting, and institutional indifference designed to break the spirit of anyone unfortunate enough to pass through its doors. But Zephyr's experience with adversity, forged in foster care and refined through years of entrepreneurial struggle, had prepared him for this moment better than Morrison and Brooks could have imagined. The intake process took nearly 4 hours, during which Zephyr was fingerprinted, photographed, searched again, and processed through a computer system that would forever mark him as having been arrested, regardless of the ultimate outcome of the charges. Each step was designed to reinforce the power dynamic. He was now a number in the system, stripped of the status and respect he'd worked years to build. But while the officers had succeeded in physically imprisoning him, they'd made a critical error in assuming that imprisonment would equal powerlessness. During his one permitted phone call, Zephyr didn't contact family members or friends seeking emotional support. Instead, he called Anastasia Blackwell, the senior partner at Blackwell, Morrison and Associates, one of Atlanta's most prestigious civil rights law firms. Anastasia had built her reputation destroying police departments that thought they were above the law, and her response to Zephyr's call was immediate and devastating. "Mr. Kingston, based on what you've told me, you've just experienced armed robbery committed by individuals wearing police uniforms. We're going to make sure they understand the difference between legitimate law enforcement and criminal conspiracy." Within 2 hours, Anastasia had mobilized a legal team that included federal civil rights attorneys, digital forensics experts, and private investigators. By the time Zephyr had spent his first night in jail, his lawyers had already filed emergency motions, subpoenaed the arrest records, and begun the process of obtaining every piece of video evidence related to his detention. The jail cell itself was a 6 by 8 foot concrete box that Zephyr shared with a man named Demetrius who'd been arrested for public intoxication. Demetrius had been through the system multiple times and recognized something different about his new cellmate. "You don't look like you belong here," Demetrius observed as they settled in for what promised to be a long night. Zephyr considered the comment carefully before responding. "Nobody belongs here, brother. But some of us have better tools for fighting our way out." The conversation that followed was illuminating for both men. Demetrius had been in and out of the system for years, primarily for minor offenses related to homelessness and addiction, and he'd seen countless examples of police misconduct that never resulted in consequences. His stories painted a picture of systemic abuse that went far beyond the theft Zephyr had experienced. "The thing is," Demetrius explained, "most of us don't have lawyers on speed dial or the money to fight back. So they keep doing it because they think nobody can stop them." Zephyr spent the night thinking about that conversation, about the hundreds of men who'd been processed through these same cells without the resources to defend themselves effectively. His anger wasn't just personal anymore, it was systemic, and it demanded a response that would protect future victims as well as seeking justice for his own case. Bold Black Watch TV is more than a channel, it's a community. Subscribe, like this video, and join us as we celebrate justice, truth, culture, and powerful Black narratives. 18 hours after his arrest, Zephyr walked out of Fulton County Jail as a free man, but freedom came with devastating news. The charges against him had been quietly dropped, just as Morrison and Brooks had planned, but the briefcase containing $2.3 million in certified checks had mysteriously vanished from the evidence room. Detective Sandra Williams, a 20-year veteran of the force who'd been assigned to review the case, met Zephyr and his attorney in the precinct lobby with barely concealed embarrassment. "Mr. Kingston, I have to inform you that there appears to have been an administrative error regarding the items confiscated during your arrest. We're conducting a full investigation to determine what happened." Anastasia Blackwell's response was immediate and cutting. "Detective Williams, let's be clear about what we're discussing here. My client was arrested without probable cause, charged with crimes he didn't commit, and now you're telling us that millions of dollars in legitimate business documents have simply disappeared? This isn't an administrative error. This is grand theft committed under color of authority." The meeting that followed was tense but illuminating. Detective Williams had been investigating Morrison and Brooks for weeks, following complaints from other victims, but she'd lacked the evidence needed to build a criminal case. Zephyr's arrest had provided that evidence, but only if they could prove the officers had deliberately stolen the money rather than simply failing to follow proper evidence procedures. "Mr. Kingston," Detective Williams explained, "if you're willing to pursue this case, we believe we can build criminal charges against the officers involved. But I want you to understand what you'll be up against. These men have badges, union representation, and a legal system that tends to give police officers the benefit of the doubt, even when the evidence suggests misconduct." Zephyr's response surprised everyone in the room, including his attorney. Instead of expressing anger or demanding immediate action, he smiled with the confidence of someone who'd spent years solving complex problems through systematic analysis. "Detective Williams, I appreciate your honesty about the challenges we'll face. But I think you're underestimating what we're capable of proving. Those officers made several critical mistakes when they decided to target me, and I have resources they didn't anticipate. The first mistake had been assuming that a young Black man couldn't afford sophisticated legal representation. The second had been failing to recognize that Zephyr's expertise in digital security extended to understanding surveillance systems, data recovery, and evidence preservation. The third, and most critical mistake, had been underestimating his determination to ensure this never happened to anyone else. Zephyr's investigation began before he'd even left the precinct building. Using his smartphone, he'd already contacted Technova's head of digital forensics, Dr. Isadora Dave, who specialized in recovering and analyzing electronic evidence for corporate litigation cases. By the time he reached his office that afternoon, Dr. Dave had assembled a team that would make the FBI's computer crime unit envious. "Zephyr," Dr. Dave explained as they gathered in Technova's secure conference room, "what most people don't realize is that modern urban environments are essentially giant surveillance networks. Every intersection has traffic cameras, every business has security systems, and every police car has multiple recording devices. The challenge isn't finding evidence, it's knowing how to access and analyze it effectively." The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the Tesla's built-in security system. The vehicle had been recording continuously while parked near the bank, capturing not only the arrest but also the officers' approach and their conversation before the confrontation began. The audio quality was sufficient to demonstrate that they'd been planning the stop before they claimed to have received reports of suspicious activity. The second breakthrough was even more damaging to the officers' case. Atlanta's downtown district was part of a comprehensive smart city initiative that included synchronized traffic cameras, environmental sensors, and emergency response systems. Dr. Dave's team was able to access 8 different camera angles that captured the entire incident from start to finish. But the most devastating evidence came from the police department's own systems. The patrol car's digital recording system had captured Morrison and Brooks discussing their plan to steal the money, their method for justifying the seizure, and their strategy for preventing Zephyr from successfully challenging the confiscation. "Listen to this," Dr. Dave said, playing an audio file that would eventually destroy both officers' careers and send them to federal prison. Morrison's voice was clearly audible saying, "The beauty is, who's going to believe him? A young black man claiming the police stole millions of dollars from him." The technical analysis took 3 weeks, but when it was complete, Zephyr's legal team had assembled a case that was essentially bulletproof. They had video evidence of the arrest from multiple angles, audio recordings of the officers planning their crime, digital proof that no robbery had been reported in the area, and documentation showing that the money had been deliberately removed from evidence storage by Morrison and Brooks themselves. But Zephyr wanted more than just criminal prosecution for the 2 officers involved. His investigation had uncovered a pattern of similar thefts targeting other victims, and he'd identified institutional failures within the police department that had enabled these crimes to continue unchecked. The case that Anastasia Blackwell ultimately built went far beyond a simple civil rights lawsuit. It was a comprehensive indictment of systematic failures within the Atlanta Police Department that had enabled criminal behavior under the guise of legitimate law enforcement activity. The victim interviews were particularly compelling. Dr. Jameson Wright, a cardiologist, had been stopped by Morrison and Brooks 6 months earlier while leaving a medical conference. They'd confiscated $1,200 in cash he'd received as a speaking fee, claiming it was suspicious for someone to carry that amount of money. Dr. Wright had hired an attorney and spent $3,000 trying to recover his money, ultimately giving up when the legal costs exceeded the amount stolen. Reverend Samuel Foster, pastor of New Hope Baptist Church, had been targeted after leaving a bank where he'd withdrawn $800 for a church charity drive. The officers had confiscated the money as potential drug proceeds, and it had disappeared from evidence storage the same day. Reverend Foster had filed multiple complaints with Internal Affairs, but his case had been closed without investigation. The pattern was clear and devastating. Morrison and Brooks had been systematically targeting successful black men in affluent areas, using fabricated probable cause to justify searches and seizures, then stealing the confiscated items through their access to evidence storage facilities. The thefts had been enabled by inadequate oversight, poor record-keeping, and a departmental culture that didn't question officers' assertions about suspicious behavior. Zephyr's case was different because he had the resources to fight back effectively, but also because the sheer scale of their theft had created digital evidence that couldn't be ignored or explained away. $2.3 million doesn't disappear accidentally, and the officers' attempts to cover their tracks had created an electronic trail that detailed their entire criminal operation. The federal investigation, triggered by Anastasia's criminal referral, ultimately identified 12 separate victims over an 8-month period, with total thefts exceeding $300,000. The case attracted attention from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, which began a comprehensive investigation of the Atlanta Police Department's policies and practices. What did this story mean to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to Bold Black Watch TV for more powerful black stories. On a crisp Monday morning in March, exactly 4 months after Zephyr's arrest, Anastasia Blackwell held a press conference that would dominate news cycles for weeks and fundamentally change how police misconduct cases were prosecuted in Georgia. Standing on the steps of the federal courthouse, flanked by Zephyr and the other victims they'd identified, she announced the filing of a $15 million federal lawsuit that named not only Morrison and Brooks as defendants, but also the city of Atlanta, the police department's leadership, and individual supervisors who'd failed to investigate obvious warning signs of corruption. The lawsuit itself was a legal masterpiece, meticulously documenting not just the theft of Zephyr's money, but the institutional failures that had made such crimes possible. It detailed inadequate training for rookie officers, insufficient oversight of evidence handling, and a departmental culture that discouraged questioning officers' decisions even when those decisions appeared to violate constitutional rights. "This case is about more than money," Zephyr told the assembled media. It's about a pattern of criminal behavior that was enabled by institutional indifference to the civil rights of black citizens. These officers weren't rogue criminals operating outside the system, they were criminals operating within a system that protected them from consequences. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The body cam footage, released as part of the lawsuit filing, showed Morrison and Brooks discussing their plan to steal Zephyr's money in such explicit terms that even the police union initially declined to defend their actions. Within 48 hours, the video had been viewed over 2 million times on various social media platforms. But the real bombshell came when federal prosecutors announced criminal charges against both officers. The evidence assembled by Zephyr's legal team was so compelling that Morrison and Brooks were arrested at their homes on charges of conspiracy, theft of government property, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and racketeering. The racketeering charge, typically reserved for organized crime cases, reflected the systematic nature of their criminal enterprise. The arrest sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Police officers stealing from citizens wasn't unprecedented, but the scale of the theft, the sophistication of the evidence, and the severity of the charges created a precedent that would influence police misconduct prosecutions for years to come. Morrison and Brooks both attempted to negotiate plea agreements, hoping to avoid federal prison sentences that could extend 20 years or more. But federal prosecutors, armed with audio recordings of the officers planning their crimes, rejected all plea offers that didn't include substantial prison time and full restitution to all victims. The criminal trial took place 8 months after Zephyr's arrest, and it was a study in contrast between preparation and desperation. Federal prosecutors, supported by Zephyr's digital evidence, presented a case that was methodical, comprehensive, and devastating. The defense, hampered by audio recordings of their clients planning crimes, was reduced to arguing that the officers had been inadequately trained and supervised. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Morrison received a sentence of 12 years in federal prison, while Brooks, who had cooperated with prosecutors and provided additional evidence about other potential victims, received 8 years. Both men were also ordered to pay full restitution and were permanently banned from law enforcement. The civil lawsuit's resolution was equally satisfying for Zephyr, though his motivations had evolved beyond personal compensation. The city of Atlanta agreed to a $15 million settlement, but more importantly, they agreed to comprehensive police reform measures that addressed the institutional failures his case had exposed. The reforms included mandatory body camera usage during all citizen interactions, independent oversight of evidence handling, enhanced training on constitutional rights and implicit bias, and the creation of a civilian review board with authority to investigate misconduct complaints. The settlement also established a victim compensation fund for people who'd been targeted by similar police crimes but lacked the resources to pursue individual cases. For Zephyr personally, the settlement provided validation that went beyond financial compensation. He'd proven that even the most powerful institutions could be held accountable when their actions violated constitutional principles. But more importantly, he'd created systemic changes that would protect future victims from experiencing what he'd endured. Technova Solutions, meanwhile, had grown substantially during the legal proceedings. The publicity surrounding the case, while initially concerning to some clients, ultimately demonstrated the company's commitment to justice and accountability, qualities that government agencies and corporate clients valued highly. The Department of Homeland Security contract that had started this entire ordeal was successfully completed on schedule, leading to additional contracts worth over $50 million. But Zephyr's most significant legacy was the police reform advocacy organization he established using a substantial portion of his settlement funds. The Kingston Foundation for Police Accountability began operations 6 months after the lawsuit's resolution, focusing on providing legal support for police misconduct victims, advocating for legislative reforms, and developing technology solutions that could prevent future abuse. When those officers saw my locks and my skin and decided I was their prey, Zephyr said during the Foundation's launch event, they made the mistake of assuming that appearance equals vulnerability. They forgot that justice has eyes too, and those eyes were watching everything they did. The Foundation's first major initiative was developing body camera technology that couldn't be disabled by individual officers, using blockchain-based storage systems to ensure that recorded evidence couldn't be altered or deleted. The technology was pilot-tested in 3 Georgia police departments, with plans for nationwide implementation. Detective Sandra Williams, who'd helped investigate Morrison and Brooks, was promoted to lieutenant and assigned to lead a new police misconduct investigation unit. Her first case involved reviewing hundreds of arrests made by officers whose patterns suggested potential constitutional violations. For Demetrius, the homeless man who'd shared Zephyr's jail cell during those 18 hours, the foundation provided job training and housing assistance that helped him break the cycle of arrests and incarceration that had defined his adult life. Their conversation in that concrete cell had planted seeds that grew into comprehensive programs serving hundreds of people experiencing similar struggles. The two rookie officers who'd thought they could steal millions of dollars from a successful entrepreneur were now serving federal prison sentences and working in the prison laundry for 12 cents per hour. Their criminal behavior had been exposed, their careers destroyed, and their futures permanently diminished by their decision to target someone they'd underestimated. Morrison and Brooks had seen a young black man with dreadlocks and assumed they'd found easy prey. Instead, they'd encountered someone with the intelligence, resources, and determination to transform their predatory mistake into a $15 million lesson that reverberated through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Justice, as Zephyr had learned through foster care, business competition, and now police corruption, wasn't automatic. It required intelligence, persistence, and the courage to fight systems that seemed too powerful to challenge. But when those elements aligned with irrefutable evidence and competent legal representation, justice could be swift, comprehensive, and transformative. The $15 million settlement was just the beginning. The real victory was creating a world where other young black entrepreneurs could walk out of banks carrying legitimate business documents without fear of being robbed by the very people sworn to protect them. Bold Black Watch TV is more than a channel. It's a community. Subscribe, like this video, and join us as we celebrate justice, truth, culture, and powerful black narratives. What did this story mean to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The Kingston Foundation for Police Accountability continues its work today, having assisted in over 200 police misconduct cases and helping to implement body camera reforms in 12 states. Zephyr Kingston remains CEO of Technova Solutions, which now employs over 500 people and holds government contracts worth more than $100 million. The Foundation's scholarship program has provided educational opportunities for 50 young people from foster care backgrounds, continuing the cycle of transformation that began with one man's refusal to accept injustice as inevitable.